to the whiteboard conversation. Oh, wait a minute. This is not a product whiteboard conversation. Let me make that clear. This is a business whiteboard conversation. Today, we're going to give you a tool that's going to help you structure a business conversation. So with that, let's get started. So typically, we send an agenda in advance. We ask the customer to add any participants or topics that they think are important. They send it back. Now I know who to bring with me to the meeting. This is a whiteboard conversation that is intended not to be a PowerPoint. So when you're having this conversation, if there's a whiteboard in the room, you're going to use it. If there isn't, I would bring an 11 by 14 piece of paper. You can always open that up and share that with the customer as you work together on it. It's a whiteboard conversation on a board. If it's not in person, there are other ways to do it as well, and we'll talk about those in the future. But for now, we are going to focus on business conversation and C-level conversation because we are expanding our reach into these customers. So they may have some services, they may not have others. So it's important for us to start looking at how do we have a conversation with other people in an organization. So I usually start my conversation, and by the way, I want to say that I've done this in person with customers when I was in sales and when I was a trainer. So I would stand up and I would say, here's our agenda. This is what we said we were going to talk about. Do you mind if I use your whiteboard so I can structure our conversation and keep us on track? And of course, no one's ever said no to me. And the other story I'll tell you is that the beauty of doing this sort of conversation with a customer is it gives you a track to run on, them a track to run on. You build something mutually together. And I've had C-levels get up and grab the marker and start writing on the whiteboard. What does that tell us, right? That's somebody who's engaged. So we're co-creating a plan. So typically, once they say, yes, you can use my whiteboard, I'm going to say there are 5 main categories that many of my C-levels are concerned about. The first one is, and every organization is in business to make money. I don't care what part of the organization you're in, you know that that's what the organization needs to do. The other part of that is to decrease total cost of ownership or keeping operational costs in check, and it's a balancing act. But there are 3 other categories in the middle that most of my C-levels are concerned about. The first one is managing change. And when I say manage change, I'm talking about how do you manage all the devices, the users, the applications, all the things that are coming in and out of the network. People are coming, they're going. How do you manage all of that ongoing stuff, right? So it's managing the constant change. The other area of concern is mitigating risk. And this is near and dear to everyone's heart. How do they mitigate risk? How do they map, automate, and prioritize all the risks that are happening on the environment? I just got done saying that there's lots of things happening always in and out of their environment. Every time something new is introduced into the environment, vulnerabilities are also introduced. How do they mitigate that risk? And the third area of concern is improving operational efficiency. So improve operational efficiency, making sure that we're ensuring productivity, we're making sure the end user experience is good. So operational efficiency, productivity, all of those things are a big concern for many of our customers, especially the C-levels. So now that I've got this information written on the board and I've given some examples underneath each one of these, and again, the examples I put below are dependent on the customer I'm working with. Every customer is unique. It's always going to be different, and you need to craft this conversation based on what you know about the customer and the information you've gathered with your teams. The next step is simply to ask the customer, so these are the categories I typically see, is there anything I'm missing? Now, I've never had a customer add anything to it, but if they did, what would you do? Well, you'd write it up here. That's what you do, because obviously that's important to the customer. Chances are really, really good that whatever they put here, it's going to fit into one of these categories, and that's okay. So now let's just say they didn't add anything. Now I've got the information on the screen. I ask the customer if they agree. Is this the information you want to talk through? And then I simply say, based on what I have on the screen, where would you start? Wherever they start is probably a big concern for them. That's probably the priority. So let's just say they say, I want to mitigate risk. Well, now it's just regular discovery. And we're not going to go through a discovery here. You're not going to develop a discovery when you break out of this into your breakout sessions, but you are going to structure a conversation based on what you know about your customer, and you're going to add some bullet points and some stories in there to help you through it. So now that I've got this information, I'm going to ask them where they'd start. If they say, I want to mitigate risk, all right, why? Why are we starting here? What's going on in the organization? When do you need to address all of these things that we talked through? Every time they give me something, I'm going to put bullet points on the screen. And then at the end of the conversation, we can come back to these things and prioritize. So I'm going to ask regular discovery questions. Why is that important? When does it need to happen? What does the success criteria look like? And then we're going to move on because we have a map in front of us. I can now ask about other areas of business concern for most of the C-levels that I work with. So what about operational efficiency? What about trouble tickets? What about applications that you're adding? What about when you have a new employee that comes on board? Are they up and running in minutes? These are other areas that you want to start to address with the customer. It gives you a map. This gives you the view of being a trusted advisor. It also allows you, again, to structure the conversation with the customer so they're engaged and they're helping to create their own plan. I cannot tell you how many times I have had a C-level say, I loved what we just did here. I want to take this information, bring it back to my next meeting, and now bring in the rest of the team, because it becomes a working plan for them. They get to prioritize what things they need to address next. This is regular discovery. I'm not going to get into that. I will say that as you talk about some of these areas, depending on your customer, you're going to introduce small little snippets, introduce thoughtful insights that you know about just to get them thinking. If they don't think they have a problem here, introduce a thoughtful insight, something you know, or stories that you can tell. Now, there are 3 other boxes that I typically put on the bottom of the whiteboard, and they are in circles, and I don't always add them. Sometimes I just avoid writing them, but I'm going to write them for you so you get in the habit of remembering that these are things you need to cover. The first circle is why change and why now? And that goes back to if it's a risk situation, are they coming up for an audit of some sort? How soon do they need to make that happen? Why are they making the change now? Why haven't they made the change in the past? This also it can be turned into a timeline instead of a circle. If they say, I need it in April, now I've got an opportunity to create a timeline so that when they go dark, I have something I can say to them. Listen, you said you needed it here. We're going to miss that. You're going to miss your opportunity. The next one is why us? This is your story. And because you've worked in your pods with your resources and your teams, you probably have some great stories you can tell based on that opportunity that you're going to go after. So this is your chance to talk about here are the things you said were important. Here is a customer that had a similar situation, and here's what we did to address it. I'm going to challenge you again. Do not say products. If you can do this whiteboard without name dropping a product and talking about just the business solution and how we address needs, you get extra stars for that. Customers don't care what the names of the products are. What they care about is how are you going to address my challenges. And the last one, very important, next steps. And again, most of these circles on the bottom of the screen are to remind you to not forget. In this next steps section, I am going to say, okay, so you told me that risk management was a big deal for you. Who on your team do I need to start working with so we can build a plan and bring that back to you? And of course, I'm going to get those names. And then this is what I'm going to make sure I do. As I work with your teams, I am going to status you every Thursday, every Wednesday, whatever it is. I'm going to come back and status you on how we're doing. Because what can happen when I start working with other teams? They may have a competitor that they love and they don't want to change. So we want to make sure we stay connected and we keep that line of communication open to this C-level or this potential champion that we're going to have in the organization. And after we get these 3 sections written in the middle, we tell the customer, I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to increase revenue or decrease your total cost of ownership. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on those. But what I will tell you is that 9 times out of 10, these 3 areas in the middle drive results to the 2 ends. And that is the business whiteboard conversation structure. Thanks.